Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is Friday, May 14th, 2021 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This week's show is all about Brad Stone's sequel to his 2013 book about Amazon that was titled The Everything Store. Released on Tuesday, May 11th, the new book is titled Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. It is an impressive tome. It clocks in at 488 pages, and in just a few moments you will hear the 30-minute conversation that I recorded with Brad on publication day. After the interview, I'm going to take some time to tell you why I'm disappointed in Brad's book, but why I'm still a sort of admirer of his work. It's complicated. I was scheduled to talk with Brad today, so I was very surprised when he direct messaged me on Twitter Tuesday afternoon, suggesting that we move it up to that evening, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That meant I had just 3 hours instead of 3 days to prepare my questions, but I knew his schedule of interviews was daunting and that it would be better to connect with him right away than possibly getting bumped later in the week. The move also enabled me to keep an appointment I'd made with my 5-year-old grandson to get ice cream after picking him up at daycare today, so that worked out really well, too. I did appreciate Brad's sending me a hardcover advanced reader copy of the book. That gave me time to carefully read it, and for his making sure that I had a chance to join the parade of interviewers seeking to discuss Amazon Unbound this week. Here is our conversation recorded Tuesday evening, May 11, 2021. Well, I'm sure you've had a busy day.
It's been a little bit of a busy day, Len, but it's really good to see you.
Likewise.
I'm sorry we were messing with you on the time, and eventually I was just like, you know what, let's just do this. And
yeah, no, that worked out great. Well, it's day one for Amazon Unbound. And you know what that means. It's a startup. It's fresh.
It's always day one.
It's always day one. I hope it'll be day one tomorrow as well. I'm just curious, what you've been working on this book a long time, and it's out there. What's been the most surprising and or gratifying reaction to it so far in the early going as people read it and talk to you about it?
You know, I've heard from a couple of Amazon employees who say, that I went deep on it, that I captured the story. Someone told me it was better than The Everything Store, which, I'm so proud of that book and how it captured the first 15 years of Amazon and like the idiosyncratic culture and the tension of working for Jeff Bezos. And so the fact that like all I wanted to do with this book was create a companion and a sequel that could live up to the first one and extend the history. I mean, I never thought I would be spending another couple years of my life, absorbed with the same guy and his company, but I was proud of The Everything Store. It felt like it was getting dated, and I thought that there was more story to tell. So the idea that, the people who know the story best feel like I got it right is totally gratifying.
What did that one person mean when they said this one was better? What about this book compared to the first? The person
who said that was a little bit of a true believer, and if you an Amazonian true believer, and if you remember, they thought that book got some things wrong, but they were never really specific about what that was. There was a general sense that maybe Jeff wasn't that bad, that, it wasn't as tense as I described it. He certainly didn't say those mean things in that meeting, but no one ever really pointed out any significant inaccuracies. And so maybe the fact is that Bezos has evolved as a leader, Amazon has evolved as a company. The one other thing I would say is that when I was working on The Everything Store, I didn't know that this was a book about the company that's going to dominate our economic reality. It was a $100 billion company at the time, and I spent about a year and a half on that book. And this book, Amazon Unbound, I worked on for about 3 years. And so I did invest much more time. It was a more complicated story because it's not a linear story. It's Alexa and India and groceries and the globalization of the marketplace and transportation and fulfillment centers and advertising. And then halfway through my research, it's HQ2 and Jeff's battle with the National Enquirer and an antitrust investigation into the big tech companies. And then the pandemic, right? So there was a lot more territory to cover in this book.
Well, and it seemed like similar, I think, to the Everything Store. Amazon changes so quickly. How do you ever know when it's the right time to end a book? And in this one, you had to go back in. I think I remember when Jeff announced he was retiring as CEO. That was just like 97 days ago. How close were you to everything being final at that point, and what did you have to do in rewriting?
Well, that was a good question, and I think that at the moment when I saw that press release, my jaw dropped and an expletive escaped from my mouth because I was completely not expecting it. And the book was in the final stages. And I was a little worried that, that I would have to do major revisions. And I was also slightly traumatized because, Len, I don't know if you remember this, but my last book was about Uber and Airbnb. Mm-hmm. And after that book came out, Travis Kalanick was fired as CEO of Uber, and there was nothing I could do except for write a new epilogue for the paperback. So after my expletive and my surprise, I was relieved that I could go in and make some changes. But what I realized after thinking about it was that I didn't need to do anything significant because the story that I had already written was one of Jeff Bezos evolving and starting to open up to a larger world and getting all of these interests beyond Amazon, like the Washington Post and his philanthropic commitments, his new relationship. I had in the book that he was building a super yacht, which should be completed later in the year to travel the world. And so it actually made a lot of sense when I thought about it. And I had to make some changes to the epilogue. But, I think fundamentally this is a book about an extraordinary time in Amazon's history, culminating in with the founder and the CEO kind of moving on and leaving the company behind, at least to a certain extent.
In a way, it was kind of a natural place for this story to end, or this part of it.
It does. It airs. To the extent I was unlucky with the Upstarts, I feel like I was fortunate with this one that Jeff kind of gave me a natural bookend.
You and I talked back in 2012, a year before the Everything Store came out, and one thing that I listened to it again, you talked about the shifting conventional wisdom about Amazon, and at that time, almost a decade ago, you described the conventional wisdom as seeing Amazon as, quote, one of the foundational technology companies. And I think that sort of captured the sense that this was before it got so big it was scary. It was just, a foundational technology company. Do you think your book, The Everything Store, helped the conventional wisdom about Amazon evolve or move in a different direction? And then where do you see the conventional wisdom about Amazon now, and what role your book may play in? Because it does seem to change a lot as the years go by.
It really does. And it hasn't been all that favorable for Amazon. To answer the second part of the question first, I think a narrative has coalesced a little bit of Amazon as a extractor of value from local economies and as a difficult employer. Bezos as a sort of scheming, billionaire. I'm not saying these are true. I'm saying this is like congealed a little bit in the conventional wisdom. And I think it was reflected in his last investor letter, where he kind of leaves this sort of legacy defining, argument that Amazon's, doesn't extract, it contributes to the economies, and he's created more value for Amazon investors than he has for himself. Like, you could really see that it was sort of top of mind for him to make this argument that he felt was being overlooked. So, I don't know that either of these books contribute to the overall sense or image of Amazon. It'd be nice to think so, but Amazon's written about every day. There are many stronger voices, including their own. They've got these direct channels on Twitter, where they sometimes put their foot in their mouth. And Bezos is writing investor letters and giving speeches. And, launching rockets. When he starts launching Blue Origin rockets, that might do more for his own image and for public perception of him. I mean, because you look at Elon Musk and the halo that has been shined over his head because he's seen as an innovator of space who's doing exciting things. So, yeah, Blue Origin still needs to execute. But I think, we're at a moment now where I think, look, you look at Mark Zuckerberg's reputation, that's poor, right? Larry Page at Google is hiding, Tim Cook fares a little bit better because Apple is sort of beloved. But Amazon, is a retailer. And do you remember, Len, in the Everything Store where I published that letter, that memo from Bezos, Amazon.love, where he basically says, when you're a retailer and you're fundamentally in competition with small, sympathetic merchants, you're going to be viewed skeptically. And certainly that was the case with Walmart, and it's now very true for Amazon.
Yeah, that was really prescient. And I remember the thesis of that memo was the most effective thing we can do to head off the likely deterioration of our level of love people feel is to be perceived as innovative. Right. And just invent.
Right. And maybe arguably that's been a problem for Amazon over the past few years. I mean, it's a high standard to say that a company needs to keep churning out hits, but Alexa was now 7 years ago. And, it's an interesting device, but it's not conversational in the way that they hoped. And I don't know about you, but I haven't networked my home together. And, the Kindle, no disrespect for the name of the podcast, but, when in the Everything Store, the Kindle was like the great big, invention for Amazon. Now, sometimes it feels a little bit like a corporate afterthought, right? They still update it, but they used to be seen as a mortal threat in book publishing, and now, their energies are certainly in publishing, but also in Hollywood and signing up sports rights and expanding globally. So, there's much more going on.
Well, and, 9 years ago, Larry Kirschbaum was still at the helm of Amazon Publishing looking for that great best-selling author that would defect, never did. The fact that Dean Koontz 2 years ago, he qualifies as a big author, did that make much of a ripple in the publishing world as you experienced it, the Big Five mainly? How are they seeing Amazon Publishing now, a decade after we were last talking about it?
It's. I didn't spend a lot of time on the publishing dynamic this time. Because, as I said before, there were so many different avenues and alleyways to go down on this one. My sense is that the relationship remains very much the same. A lot of skepticism on both sides, a lot of codependence. Still a lot of sort of fear and uncertainty about Amazon's intentions. But maybe the idea that Amazon Publishing would pose an existential threat, that the Kindle or, with its pricing, or Amazon with its private label publishing would destroy the big publishing houses. I feel like maybe that's receded somewhat. And what's happened is all this consolidation in book publishing, right? But that is partly because of Amazon, right? You want, I can't even keep track, but the great Random House, Simon & Schuster, Penguin conglomeration is so they can negotiate with their biggest retail partner. So Amazon is still the bright sun, and all those publishing companies are in orbit around it. And, but there does seem to be less drama now than there was back when we talked first time.
That's a good way to describe it. I find one of the really interesting things, having followed your work now for 2 books and before that as well, this issue of whether or not Bezos was going to talk to you. I mean, that was an issue in the first book. And I remember that he let you talk to everybody, including his family. So it was like an amazing amount of access you had in that book. But he had some kind of a reason not to have you talk to him. And it wasn't so much like, I don't trust you, Brad Stone. Do you remember what was his rationale for kind of protecting you from interviewing him?
For the first book?
Yeah.
He said it was too early to tell the Amazon story.
Oh.
But look, and this time around, he allowed me to talk to senior executives and friends, but he didn't sit for an interview. And, we could go into specific reasons of why that is. But I would just say that when you look at the number of interviews he's done over the last 10 years, mostly it's on stage at a big event. Oftentimes it's with a sympathetic or a friendly questioner. So David Rubenstein, the billionaire hedge fund magnate, interviewed him maybe most recently. His brother interviewed him on stage at an event in LA. He's just not sitting, with a journalist who might ask a pesky and unpredictable question. At an AWS event that I went to while I was working on the book, he had an Amazon employee who was interviewing him. So these just aren't the kinds of things that he's doing right now. You know what? And that's fine. When, he doesn't tend to be, he's very disciplined and scripted in his interviews. And so I don't know that it would have been very useful, frankly, to have that kind. Now, look, I always try. I sent a bunch of requests. I sent him a bunch of emails. I tried to get specific about what I would ask to make them more comfortable. And in the end, it didn't work out.
I remember Walt Mossberg had a fairly contentious interview with Jeff, in which he casually said, well, you destroyed the independent bookstores, so, how can you say this or that? And right. Get a little testy. But you're right, most of it, Henry Blodgett. Actually, Blodgett was fairly confrontational, even though Bezos owns a large part of his company. But the one thing I remember from that one is if I remember right, he said he thought the Everything Store was the best account of Amazon's culture that he had seen. And then Blodgett drew him in. Well, yeah, but how about Mackenzie's one-star review? What do you think about that? And he gave his laugh and said, "You're not going to draw me into an argument with my wife here, I hope, Henry." But I thought that indicated that that he respected the job you'd done in that, and it made me hopeful that in the second book, maybe he would sit down and I think of Stephen Levy talking to Jobs,
right.
and there's probably a lot of differences. I'd be curious what you think is the difference between the relationship between Levy and Jobs and you and Bezos, and the advantages that Levy had for whatever reasons. I tend to think Levy was a little bit more willing to show that he admired Jobs, that it wasn't.
Well, do you mean? I mean, Stephen's written great books about Apple, two great books, but also Walter Isaacson's book, obviously, towards the end of Jobs' life.
Do you think it's because it was so upsetting that you tracked down his biological father who didn't know he existed, and that if you hadn't done that, you might have been able to talk to him for this book? Or would you have done it if you had known? Or that got mentioned in your introduction as something that you'd heard he was upset about.
That's right. And for folks who don't remember, in the Everything Store, I paid a visit to Jeff's long-lost biological father, since deceased, who hadn't known what had happened to his son, and then subsequently, wanted to get back in touch with the family. And I probably could have handled that better, but I don't think it endeared me to Bezos or the Bezos family. But I would do it again. Maybe I would handle it more gracefully. But I wanted to know. You're writing a biography about someone, and you want to know where they came from, and what are those unique ingredients in their early life that contribute to this strange elixir of drive and passion and intellect. And so it was important. Jobs was someone who loved to manipulate the press. Work the press individually. But I remember sitting with my daughters as they're little babies, feeding them, and my phone rings, and it's Steve Jobs calling me on my cell phone to complain about, this or that fight with Google that he was having. Jobs loved to do that. Okay. I'm not saying those biographers were manipulated. I shouldn't have said it that way. But he enjoyed casting his own mythology, and Jeff just doesn't do that. He's just much more disciplined, and maybe he's saving it for his own book at some point. But look, if Jeff were to come and say, hey, let's do volume 3, I'll tell you everything. Heck yeah, I'll do that.
Good.
Yeah, even though right now I just want to go to sleep for a couple of months.
There's an anecdote. There's so many great stories. Your pursuit of the story and the memos that have never been public and all of that, that's kind of your brand at this point. But one of them was you ended up talking with someone who Jeff had showed up at their house and he'd been there as a child. Tell that story. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked about that, Len, because I was actually thinking to myself, I wonder if anyone will ask about this. And I sort of bled and sweat to get this really maybe ultimately inconsequential story. But the long story short is in 2016, a guy who's living in Florida outside of Miami, Palmetto, gets a ring on the doorbell, goes, it's like Saturday morning. He answers the door and Jeff Bezos is standing there. And he's like, I used to live here. I grew up here in my high school years. Do you mind if I look around? And he's blown away. He had no idea that Bezos grew up in his house. And it was this whole awkward scene because his wife didn't know who he was, and the guy got nervous and he didn't make the introductions properly. And basically I was talking to Jeff's childhood friend, Josh Weinstein, and Josh had mentioned this anecdote. And I had to spend 3 months trying to find the owner of the house, whose name he didn't remember, and then get the guy to talk to me and tell me the story because he just wasn't responding and he didn't seem to want to talk about it. And then he was fine. He was totally cool. And he was like, yeah, thanks for being tenacious. I was avoiding you. And I used the story to kind of illustrate a waypoint in the transformation of Jeff from a pretty well-known business person to someone who had real fame, whose presence in a room or at a party or even knocking on the door outside changes the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And that's one little point on that evolution. And it was just an enormously entertaining story. And I was sort of proud of myself for getting it too. And also shows that he was still a good friend to his high school friend. He had gone there because the family was mourning the passing of his friend's, I think it was his father, and Jeff had flown with one of his sons to go visit them while they were mourning. So it showed a lot of different aspects to Bezos, I thought.
Yeah. That 2016 was the last time I had a chance to interview Jeff. They asked me to fly out, and I had like 20 minutes with him in
I remember that
conference room.
Yeah,
and I really kind of distrust my memory of how he came across, but it was very unpretentious. I mean, he started out saying, is your recorder, you might set your recorder because when I laugh it can get really loud, and I was saying, well, I'm going to record it this way and this way, and he said, that's really smart, and his level of attention. I mean, I was just this small time podcaster that and I felt like he was engaging me, he was answering my questions in a substantive way. And I came back telling my wife, I said, that guy surprisingly is just sort of, he struck me as gentle. I mean, even like his hands or the whole affect of being with him, kitty corner on a table, I didn't feel like I was in the presence of somebody who really had much awareness or sense of using his power. Mm-hmm. But, and you've had, you've got in the first book, the woman, Joy, who died tragically in the bike accident, and what she said about what it was like working for Jeff and Jeff breaking down at her thing. I guess what I wonder is, because of the dramatic arc of his life in the last 10 years, has he become more jaded, more hard-edged, more sort of ferocious, or have we become less willing to believe he's a normal person because he is, quote, the richest man in the world? I mean, it's like something has really shifted.
Right.
And it's not to his benefit. He generally comes across, and where I thought I saw a similar person than the one I sat next to was in that prepared talk at Congress. He talks about, obviously very well written and all this, but I thought delivered with some passion and some credibility about what has this country meant to my father, stuff like that. But I guess it's just a long way of, you've had as close a view of him as anybody. Do you think he's changed, or have our expectations of him changed? What's the formula that has got him in really kind of a tougher place than he was 10 years ago? Well,
look, I think that he's always presented, as a humble and someone down to earth technologist in settings like talking to me and you, and probably one-to-one, But at the same time, let's make no mistake, he left an interview with me or an interview with you and went into a large room full of 50 executives, commandeered the room, ripped up their paper, told them to go redo it, made their lives a hell. And that's why Amazon's successful. Yeah. But I would also say,
both be true.
Right, they're both true. But I do think he's changed, and I hope that Amazon Unbound charts that change, because I try to plant some of these seeds in the introduction. Jeff in 2010, let's just say, is he's not a guy who likes the luxuries of being a billionaire. He's not a boat guy. He's not a fancy car guy. He loves the plane because it saves him time, and he's focused like hell on Amazon and making it a success. Blue Origin, he's spending maybe once a week there, maybe. And the 2021 Jeff is building a super yacht, has homes in every city, is like courtside at Wimbledon, is wearing fancy clothes in front of the Taj Mahal. It's like, that's a trajectory. And, look, he enjoys his stature. He's famous in a way that he wasn't. He's wealthy in a way that he wasn't. That's interesting. And I think, it's also happening at a moment where, we're all fretting as a society about income inequality and the divisions between the masses and the very wealthiest people, and how billionaires have come through the pandemic seemingly richer than ever. Right. And so, that is going to create a lot of enmity. He hasn't been a beneficiary of that, but it doesn't seem to me like he cares all that much.
Yeah. Well, let's finish up on your treatment of the antitrust stuff is really interesting. That Lena Khan figure is so fascinating. I mean, she could be on the FTC. In a couple of weeks. I mean, I read the paper. Well, I tried to. That's a very dense paper she wrote in the Yale Law Review. Right. And next thing you know, she's standing behind the chairman of the committee, and now somebody ought to be writing a book about her. But I think I've heard you say in a podcast today, and others, Stephen, I think, has said the same thing, Levy. Antitrust sort of gets the focus. Even Bezos back in that earlier book, it's like they're worried about antitrust. They don't want to be chasing gazelles and doing things that gives any fodder for that. But that it's such a slow process, and a lot of it has to go through the courts, and a lot of it has to, the law has to change or be reinterpreted. And meanwhile, Amazon is changing so quickly, and it could fail. When I get people on from Amazon, they often want to say, well, let's do it on Chime. And I tried to do that once, and I said, well, I got to play along here. And I said, F that. This is going to be on Zoom, and I'm telling you it's on Zoom. But, Chime didn't become the Zoom of the pandemic, and they don't. Fire Phone is sort of the obvious example, but the competitive chances for them to fail at the speed of the internet seem like the bigger threat to them than antitrust.
Although, I'm just Googling this really quickly, Zoom may be the big video conferencing victor of the pandemic, but Zoom has a multi-year cloud provider deal with AWS. And so,
win anyway.
Sometimes Amazon's failures, they do find a way to win anyway.
Good point. But how do you assess the chance that antitrust is really going to become the story in the next 5 or 10 years and its impact on Amazon?
Yeah, I think it's a story. I think that Amazon is an enormously complicated target for lawmakers and regulators. It's not a conventional monopoly. In retail, not only is it smaller in sales than Walmart, but it's also, I think its pivot to marketplace and away from being a safe place for brands has opened up plenty of room for competition from companies like Shopify. And then on the AWS side, Microsoft's a big competitor and a larger company by market cap. So sometimes I don't feel like there's a sophisticated understanding of Amazon from some of its critics. I hope that the book offers a better understanding. I do think there's room for good attention and smart laws on say, Amazon's development of private label products and its use of third-party data. The way in which that when sellers or drivers or people affected by Amazon, have legal cases against the company, how difficult it is, how often those have to be, adjudicated in private settlement negotiations rather than winding their way through the courts. I think there's a lot there that can be done. But the antitrust process, feels like such a clunky tool, and we saw Microsoft go through it in the 90s, and they weren't broken up. I have a hard time seeing how Amazon is broken up unless it's voluntary. Yeah. But you mentioned Lena Khan and the FTC, and there will now be some more sophisticated people in the Biden administration looking at the big tech companies. The other thing is that Microsoft had the full attention of the Department of Justice, and now the tech companies are kind of lining up, right, to be targets. And you've got Facebook and Google and Amazon and Apple, and I don't know if the government in the U.S. and in the EU are capable of that kind of antitrust multitasking.
Yeah, they each have to take a number for their time at the deli.
Exactly.
I love the photo you put up on Instagram of your 103-year-old grandmother getting a copy of the book. And I was asking our friend Alexa, she may have remembered Thomas Edison when she was a young girl growing up in the first part of you've got a reference to Edison and the things. But what was her reaction to the book? It was just a kind of wonderful personal history there.
Well, Len, it's funny. I went over there for Mother's Day, and I asked her, and it wasn't a very satisfying book report. Well, my grandmother, 103 years old, Bernice Yasmin, is a force of nature and reads everything and is in great shape. She doesn't have great recall for things that she's read recently. So she was sort of perplexed by my question, but the book is there open on her bedside. So she's reading it. She's also, you can understand, has never used the internet,
Wow.
We tried 20 years ago, but the extent to which some of these things are sort of foreign to people who didn't, who not only didn't grow up with them, but grew up in the generation before the people who didn't grow up with them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I would like to say I got a stellar review, but I'm just happy she's reading it, and I was able to give her a copy.
Well, there was at least one wonderful smile. That was worth it.
That was worth it. That was really great. Yeah, thank you.
Well, anything else you want to mention? Important things on your schedule this week that I know you're going to be on Clubhouse. That's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, that'll be fun. But the one I'm excited about, I don't know when this will post, but on Thursday, the 13th at night, I'm talking with Karen Weiss, the New York Times Amazon reporter, at Town Hall in Seattle.
Oh.
And that's, a virtual event, of course, as they all are now. But Town Hall is the venue in Seattle. And, because Seattle is such a big part of the Amazon story, I'm hoping that we get a really good turnout and some great questions. Who knows? Maybe some Amazonians will show up. And Karen herself has a pretty good understanding of Amazon. So
cool. I have been speaking with Brad Stone, author of Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Thanks very much, Brad. Good luck with the book.
Len, always great to talk to you. Thank you.
I have a lot of things I want to talk with you about, and I actually organized it into 5 sections for the rest of the show. And they are: 1, the Kindle is not an afterthought. 2, has Jeff Bezos changed? 3, does this book help understand Amazon and what should be done with it? 4, the bottom of the scrofulous barrel. And 5, the book I can't wait for. So let's start with the Kindle is not an afterthought. I'm sure it won't surprise any of you to learn that I took issue with Brad's description of the Kindle as a corporate afterthought. It's obvious that the Kindle's continuing evolution now is not as headline-catching as the early years, but whenever I have a chance to interview someone from the Kindle team on this show, I always come away impressed at the depth and passion that the team brings every day to their work on behalf of readers, especially readers like you and me, who love the experience of long-form reading on Kindles and Kindle apps on other devices. Just a couple of examples. You may remember my February conversation with a young Amazon exec named Patrick Wolahan, whose title is Principal Product Manager and Worldwide Series Lead at Amazon. His job is to think about how to innovate and improve the way readers can enjoy series of books, such as a mystery series. That sort of laser focus on specific parts of the Kindle reading experience is what I think makes it clear that the Kindle is far from an afterthought for Amazon. I've heard it described as part of the DNA of the company, and when you see how many times Brad describes executives reading a 6-page memo in silence at the start of a meeting, I think you can hear an echo of how primary books and ebooks technology have been from the founding of the company. Likewise, another guest I had was Joanna Hunt, manager of Kindle Accessibility in August of last year, and that's how we learned how the accessibility team that she heads has quietly, over the span of several years, actually established a collaboration with the National Federation of the Blind, which less than 10 years ago had blind people protesting at Amazon's headquarters to demand more accessibility for blind students in classrooms that were using Kindles. That's a hard story to tell. It happens to be the story that I've been telling here for 12 years, and I have not seen any diminishment of Amazon's commitment to the Kindle and the Kindle platform. And there's a whole other layer here of content. Some of the things we've seen in the innovations of Kindle Originals and Amazon Publishing, the ability to have the technology stay apace and to have content that we can read using it. This isn't in any way a backwater of the company, which was the impression that I think Brad left in the book. Second topic, has Jeff Bezos changed? I think the biggest question, in my view, that remains unanswered in Brad's new book is whether Jeff Bezos has changed. Brad believes he has. It's because of the Hollywood parties, the divorce, the building of a super yacht. I find those bits of evidence actually to be kind of unconvincing indicators of whether Bezos has changed what's fundamental about his leadership of the company. I haven't spoken with Jeff myself in 5 years, and I can imagine that finding himself the richest person in the world with all the attendant fame and celebrity may well have turned him into a jerk. Brad says that's the conventional wisdom, that he's seen by many people as a scheming billionaire. Brad says, he's not saying that's true. That's just what the perception is. It certainly is plausible to think that to go from the trajectory that Jeff has had in his life, and especially in the last 25 years, to where he is now, that could change someone. But I don't see any evidence in this book or much that I've seen elsewhere of really who he has become. You see these sort of flashy images and you can put together a story, but I think we're going to have to wait for Jeff's own book to really get the answer to that question. And I'm glad he is himself a powerful, credible writer on his own, as the National Enquirer found out from Jeff's Medium post. So we'll find out someday how much all this changed Jeff Bezos, but I don't think this book is the one that really gives us the best information on that. Topic 3, does this book help us to understand Amazon and what should be done to it? Brad says at one point there is not a sophisticated understanding of Amazon from some of its critics. And I believe he is sincere in thinking Amazon Unbound will help rectify that. What detracts from that purpose, I would argue, is spending so much time in the book on the post-divorce National Enquirer story and the highlighting of leaked memos, off-the-record conversations with former employees, and other sort of scoops that show his impressive work in getting these stories, but I don't think that they do much to advance understanding of Amazon's impact, success, and problems. So I'm going to drill into one aspect of this to give you an example of how I think the book fails to actually give an understanding of the company's actual success, challenges, whatever. There was a passage that I read in the book that sent me into immediate fact-checking mode, and it was a paragraph describing Amazon Prime Air, which Jeff revealed in a 2013 CBS 2020 interview with Charlie Rose. And in that paragraph, he mentions his infamous 60 Minutes interview in 2013 to announce that the company was working on aerial drones to ferry individual packages to people's backyards. Several operations executives, Brad writes, told me they were embarrassed by that stunt, which 7 years later had progressed no further than private tests. They used an old internal Microsoft term to describe it, cookie licking, or the act of claiming to do something before you actually do it in order to capture notoriety and prevent others from following. And that's on page 233 of the book. I don't doubt that Brad accurately quoted several operations executives who had doubts about Prime Air. And I also bet it would have been fairly easy to find Amazon engineers in 2006 who thought it was insane to try to create an e-reader that could download books wirelessly in 60 seconds at no cost to the reader. So the question is, are we left with an accurate view of how serious Amazon has been from the beginning in its stated mission to deliver packages under 5 pounds within 30 minutes by drone? Well, it turns out it's not necessary to rely on leaked memos or anonymous sources to answer that question. The public record is full of evidence about how much work has gone into this effort and how likely it is that drone deliveries will represent another dramatic reimagining of retailing by Amazon. I was at the Remars conference in June 2019 when Jeff Wilke gave an update on the drone project. At that time, he stated that it would be autonomous, and that's an important word because it means they're not planning to have pilots driving or flying the drones from a distant base, like, the military drones get driven from Virginia. They are going to be programmed to get to their destination autonomously. Wilkie showed a video of the latest version of the drone, and it combined vertical takeoff with and vertical landing. But while it was getting to the target, it was traveling like an airplane over a distance of up to 15 miles. This did not look like a stunt, and this is back in 2019. In March of last year, Amazon hired David Carbon, a former Boeing executive, to run Prime Air. That was reported by CNET and others. He brought more than 20 years of experience to scale up manufacturing and delivery operations, and it was reported that his experience might help with the regulators, too. The regulatory side, of course, has been a huge obstacle to move forward in this, and Jeff underestimated the time that it was going to take to do that. He had an optimistic view of it would be somewhere in 5 years or so. At the Mars event in 2017, this is a similar event. I did not get an invitation to that one, but I saw accounts that Amazon had demonstrated delivery of sunscreen by a drone to the attendees at the event, and that was the first public demonstration of the technology in the U.S. There had been one before in the U.K. All of the previous flights in the U.S. had been on private property, and the Mars demo was conducted with the assistance of the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, the FAA, in August of last year, gave Amazon what is referred to as a Part 135 Air Carrier Certificate. And that followed submission of detailed evidence of the technology, safety demos based on thousands of flight hours. And this is basically, as I understand it, the FAA is requiring Amazon and other companies that are looking to use drones to have them pass muster on a safety basis the way a new airline would, a plane that could carry 500 people. There's no differentiation between that and a drone in how carefully the FAA is looking at this technology. And, good for them. I mean, obviously, the safety is the biggest thing. I found reporting on whether this particular milestone, the Part 135 Air Carrier Certificate, was significant. There's actually a story in Bloomberg, which is where Brad Stone works, and it was written in August 31st of last year by Alan Levin, And he wrote, quote, "Retail behemoth Amazon.com Inc. took a big step toward delivering goods from the sky by becoming one of only a handful of companies certified by the U.S. government to operate as a drone airline. The Federal Aviation Administration designated Amazon Prime Air as an air carrier," the company said Monday. That allows Amazon to begin its first commercial deliveries in the U.S. under a trial program using the high-tech devices it unveiled for that purpose last year. Now, the other two that have that same designation are Wing, which is an initiative of Google, and UPS. They've got their own drone delivery projects going on. The reason this particular reference in Amazon Unbound triggered skepticism on my part is that I remember that 60 Minutes piece in 2013. I was so excited about it, and I was pretty sure that Bezos was serious about drone delivery. At that time, as I remember, there were suggestions that, this is just a stunt designed to goose Christmas retail sales that year. And I said to myself, well, we'll see. What irritates me now about Brad's reference really is kind of one single word, infamous. He's able to attach that to the 60 Minutes interview kind of retroactively. He calls it Jeff's infamous 60 Minutes interview in 2013 to announce that the company was working on aerial drones. Infamous? I think it's kind of a neat trick when skeptics and critics can express doubt about the sincerity of an announcement, which turns out to have been legitimate and perhaps historic. I think the evidence points to that. And then because of their own critique, label the announcement as infamous. Well, we'll see. Fourth topic, the bottom of the scrofulous barrel. In my view, such casual dismissal of Bezos' sincerity and Amazon's credibility really run through a lot of Brad's book. And I think the reason may be that related to the fact that he spends more time pushing back at what he calls the wall of mirrors within Amazon, looking for leaked documents or anonymous internal critics, than he does simply trying to get the story right about the company's accomplishments and impact. If there's something that is a secret, he wants to find it, and connecting the dots to create meaning out of these comments he gets from people and leaked memos, that just doesn't really seem to interest him as much. That's a theory. I mean, I'll just posit that as speculation on my part. Stephen Levy interviewed Brad at Clubhouse earlier this week, and there was an interesting tension between the two of them. I think they worked together, and Levy was probably Brad's boss at Newsweek back in the day. And at one point, Stephen said, "No one got more to the bottom of this scrofulous barrel than you did." And that was talking about the National Enquirer interaction with Jeff and the divorce and all of that. Levy, he's spent a career covering technology with, in my opinion, integrity, elegant writing, and serious intent to help readers understand the impact of technology and tech companies on our daily lives. His books are business books, kind of in the old-fashioned way of understanding it. When Stephen used, Stephen's a great wordsmith, and that word, the bottom of this scrofulous barrel, Brad appeared to feel that jab, and he punched back vigorously. He called it journalistic delight that he felt when the National Enquirer story broke, because it spiced up his own business book with helicopters and, I'll use a term that he used, dick pics. I'm sorry to use that exact word, but I think it's telling that he used it at this Clubhouse event with enthusiasm. He just thought it was terrific that, he wasn't just going to have to write a boring Harvard Business School case study about Amazon. He's going to have all this spicy stuff. And he said the Coen brothers should make a movie about the incident. So there's no question that Brad Stone has written another entertaining, spicy book about a company and a founder that has commanded growing attention for the past 25 years. But I do question how much this book really advances our understanding of either Amazon or Jeff Bezos. I think for that we may have to wait for Jeff's own book, which I'm sure will be worth waiting for. 5, the book I can't wait for. As I was concluding my interview with Brad, I could feel myself wondering exactly how I would sign off. I usually say, I have been speaking with Brad Stone, so-and-so. Thanks very much, Brad. And I added, good luck with your book. And as I thought about it, and I've worked on this show for you, given how critical I knew I was going to be in talking about the interview in the book, I thought, well, maybe I should edit that comment out. Why would I be wishing him good luck with a book that I'm going to take such issue with? But you know what? I do wish him good luck because I think he's a hardworking journalist. He's a likable guy. He has a real grace to him. And I'm sure that's partly how he's been able to develop such deep sourcing for his books. People like talking with him. I like talking with him. He doesn't seem to have an agenda. He's not there to sort of take down Bezos or Amazon like some other reporters, like that guy at the New York Times that'll go nameless. He's just looking for a good story, and he knows one when he sees one. There will be plenty of other sources of information and perspective on Amazon and Bezos in the years ahead. So, I don't think it's up to this one charming journalist to be responsible for the definitive account. I certainly plan to continue following the story of Amazon myself for as long as I can. And, I look forward to the first time a drone will settle down in the backyard out my window here in Cambridge with an under 5-pound product, maybe a hardcover copy of Jeff's own telling of his story, based on an often told anecdote about the regret minimization framework that he used to decide to leave a good Wall Street job in order to see what he could do on the internet. I can imagine a simple title to that drone-delivered book: No Regrets, How Jeff Bezos Became Infamous and Changed the World. Stay tuned. That's it for this week. My guest next week will be A.G. Riddle, author of Pandemic and other science-based novels. He'll be back again talking about the pandemic, and I'm really looking forward to asking him about the great unmasking that began taking place this week. It's just so great to be out on my bicycle without wearing a mask. And when my guitar teacher, Steve Netsky, came over, neither one of us had masks because we've both been vaccinated. And it's just remarkable. And it kind of crept up on us. Now, all of a sudden, in most cases, according to the CDC, we can just be walking around the way we used to. Now, there are cautions and variants, and this is when these moments of change and inflection take place are really when Jerry Riddle has been such a great resource this past year. So I'll be glad to have him back on the show. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.